Monday, July 19, 1993, President Clinton called FBI Director William Sessions to tell him that he was dismissed. It would be the first time in our nation's history that a president had fired an FBI director. He called a second time a few minutes later. The president seemed to be in a hurry. Time was of the essence. Sessions was to leave the Hoover building effective immediately. The next day, Vince Foster's body was found in Fort Marcy Park, dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Under the assassination statute, the FBI would have been compelled by law to take over the case if there was any question that it might have been a homicide. But with the firing of its director, the FBI was in turmoil, and the Park Police became the lead agency in charge. The Park Service had neither the depth nor the experience to investigate a case of this magnitude, which led many to ponder the question, was it the intention of the White House to limit the scope of the investigation? Vince Foster had been a close friend of Bill Clinton's in their boyhood town of Hope, Arkansas. As Deputy White House Counsel for the Clinton administration, Foster became the highest-ranking U.S. government official to die under mysterious circumstances since President John F. Kennedy. He, more than anyone else, knew the financial secrets of both the campaign of 1992 and the Clinton presidency, just as he knew the secrets of the Rose Law Firm and of Hillary Rodham Clinton's business and financial dealings over the previous decade. Dealings that would become the subject of numerous investigations. On July 22nd, Foster's briefcase was searched twice by Bernard Nussbaum in the presence of Justice Department officials and the U.S. Park Police. 4 days later, a suicide note mysteriously appeared in the briefcase. It was torn into 28 pieces with one piece missing. No fingerprints were found on the note, only a partial palm print of Nussbaum's. Distinguished handwriting experts were contacted, the most famous being Dr. Reginald Alton of Oxford University in England. The note, he said, was a fake. It was the work of a forger. Associate Independent Counsel Mikel Rodriguez was not a conservative. Indeed, when he arrived from California with his ponytail, his earring, and his leather jacket, there were some that said Kenneth Starr had gone too far in his efforts to recruit liberal Democrats and ethnic minorities to his team. Rodriguez spent his time combing through the archive of documents in the Foster case, and he didn't like what he saw. He managed to gain access to the locked files in the office of the Independent Counsel. Hidden inside was a folder of crime scene photographs that had been deliberately withheld from the prosecutor. Among them was the original Polaroid of Foster's neck. Rodriguez went to the Smithsonian Institution for enhancement of the original. The blow-up photo revealed a dime-sized wound on the right side of Foster's neck, suggesting a gunshot fired at point-blank range into the flesh. The medical examiner at the scene was Dr. Hout. After examining Foster's body, he made reference to a wound on Foster's neck on page 2 of his report. This finding was in agreement with 2 of the rescue workers who testified before the Whitewater grand jury that they too saw a gunshot wound on Foster's neck. Incredibly, in the official autopsy report on Vincent Foster, a gunshot wound to the head is listed, but the wound on the neck is completely left out. The official autopsy conducted by Dr. Beyer states that there was a large 1 by 1 1/4 inch exit wound found on Foster's head. Both Fisk and Starr in their final reports similarly maintain that there was an exit wound on Foster's head. However, this is in direct conflict with those who examined the body at the scene. A .38 special will take the back of your head off. Blood and brain matter everywhere. Yet no skull fragments or brain matter were found by the FBI or Park Police. 2 days after Vincent Foster's body was discovered in Fort Marcy Park, an FBI memo was sent to then-acting Director Floyd Clark. It says in part, quote, preliminary results of the autopsy include the finding that a .38 caliber revolver constructed from 2 different weapons was fired into the victim's mouth with no exit wound, unquote. This was in agreement with Detective John Rollo, who examined Foster's body at the scene. He agreed that there was no exit wound, and in fact stated that he thought the bullet might still be lodged in Foster's head. Paramedics Corey Ashford and Roger Harrison put the body in a bag for transport to the morgue, yet neither of them saw an exit wound or any blood, either on the body or on the ground beneath the body. This was in agreement with Dr. Hout, who examined the body at the scene and wrote in his report that the wound was mouth to neck. Paramedic Todd Hall was one of the first to arrive. He testified before the grand jury that he saw two men running away from the scene into the woods. Paramedic Richard Arthur, who had attended to 25 to 30 gunshot deaths in his 9 years as a rescue worker, believed it was a homicide. "I've just never seen a body lying so perfectly straight," he said. His colleague, Corey Ashford, also had coded the death as a homicide. For 4 months, Rodriguez probed the case. He called witnesses before a grand jury and soon discovered serious indications of a cover-up. By the early spring of 1995, he was starting to probe a hypothesis that the crime scene at Fort Marcy Park had been staged, that the gun had most likely been planted in Foster's hand, and that a crucial photograph of Foster's neck and head had been falsified. He turned to his boss, Kenneth Starr, for support. Nothing was done to resolve the matter. In March 1995, Rodriguez resigned. The only serious investigation ever conducted into the death of Vincent Foster came to an abrupt end. The confidential witness had stopped at Fort Marcy Park and had ventured about 700 feet into the wooded groves where he spotted a body lying in the dense foliage. He looked as if he'd been dead for a long time. "I mean hours," he said. The bed of dried leaves below the body had been very heavily trampled, and his hands were neatly next to his body with the palms up. He said under oath to a congressional delegation that he saw no weapon, no gun. There was nothing in Foster's hands. A Park Police Polaroid shows a .38 Colt revolver hooked on Foster's thumb. It was made from parts of at least 2 separate weapons, and it had 2 different serial numbers. The only recorded sale to gun retailers of both serial numbers was in 1913, and that was too old to trace. Foster's fingerprints were not found on the gun, although a print belonging to someone else was found under one of the detachable grips. A .38 Special has a fierce recoil and can throw one's hand back over their head. However, the large sight on the gun did not damage Foster's teeth or gum tissue, and the gun was neatly at his side. Residents of homes as close as 300 yards away were never interviewed by the Park Police as to whether they had heard a gunshot. The bullet was never found. No matching ammunition was found in Foster's house. Also, note the heavy foliage around the body, which is inconsistent with the dirt pathway in front of the second cannon where the police claim the body was found. Foster would have had to walk 700 feet into the park, yet the FBI lab tests found no coherent soil on Foster's shoes. Investigators doing simulation walks found an abundance of soil on their shoes. 2 homicide detectives who performed their own 2-month investigation into the Foster case concluded that the crime scene had likely been staged, with the gun placed in Foster's hand to make it look like a suicide. This report, funded by the Western Journalism Center in California, was prepared by Vincent Scalise and Fred Santucci, both veteran homicide experts from the New York City Police Department. Two witnesses, Mark and Judy, were interviewed by the FBI in April 1994. They drove a white Nissan into the parking lot at Fort Marcy Park. Judy said she saw a man sitting in Vince Foster's Honda. Mark said that a man with long blonde hair had been standing by the open hood of Foster's car. Blonde hairs were later found on Foster's undershirt, his trousers, belt, socks, and shoes. But the FBI never tried to identify these hairs. Kenneth Starr concluded his report in July 1997 without calling these two witnesses before the grand jury. Another witness, Patrick Knowlton, stopped by Fort Marcy Park to relieve himself. He saw a car and Foster's suit jacket folded over the driver's seat. But it was not Foster's car. He also saw a threatening Hispanic man on watch in the parking lot of Fort Marcy Park. After telling the FBI what he saw, Mr. Knowlton was asked not to mention what he saw to the press. Mr. Knowlton agreed. 17 months later, he discovered through an investigative reporter his statements to the FBI had been changed. Knowlton's description of the unoccupied car in the lot was twisted, so it could have been Vince Foster's, even though his real statement rules out any possibility of the car being Foster's. The time he was at the park is expanded. It fails to say that Knowlton could pick the suspicious character out of a lineup. Through his attorney, Patrick Knowlton submitted a 20-page evidential insert to the 3-judge panel that appointed Kenneth Starr. As he put it, to make sure that the report was full and complete. Attached was Exhibit 1, which is a map of the cars in the Fort Marcy lot. Knowlton was parked next to an older model Honda that was not Vince Foster's car. According to the official record, the best estimates put the time of Mr. Foster's death at between 2 and 4 p.m. However, Mr. Foster's body was discovered at 5:45 p.m., or approximately 70 minutes after Patrick had left the park. Mr. Foster, therefore, could not have driven to the park in his Honda. Exhibit 2 is a map depicting the harassment Patrick suffered. The day he was subpoenaed to testify before the grand jury, he was harassed by at least 25 men who would walk toward him or came at him from behind with threatening glares in their eyes. This technique is known to federal intelligence and investigative agencies, and its objects are twofold. 1, to intimidate and warn witnesses in connection with his grand jury testimony, and 2, to destabilize him and discredit his testimony before the grand jury. In this exhibit, Mrs. Foster could identify only a silver gun. So FBI agents apparently showed Lisa Foster a silver gun, told her it was found in Mr. Foster's hand, and falsely reported that she identified the black gun found in Mr. Foster's hand as belonging to Mr. Foster. And yet another exhibit shows that the FBI concealed the gunshot wound in Mr. Foster's neck by concealing the contents of the medical examiner's report, which states that there was a gunshot wound in Mr. Foster's neck, falsely reporting that the 35mm photographs were underexposed, concealing that Polaroid photographs vanished, and concealing that autopsy x-rays had in fact been taken. That in the U.S. Park Police report, Dr. Byer discussed the existence of x-rays. That the technician who installed the x-ray machine said that it was in good working condition. But the Fisk report stated that the x-ray machine was inoperable at the time of Foster's autopsy, and as a result, no x-rays were taken.